Everyone, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the day 2 of the 7th World Zoroastrian Youth Congress. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Carl Regina. I'm out of San Diego, California. And today we have a pretty action-packed day. We know yesterday was kind of heavy on the session, so we're going to definitely enjoy Los Angeles this afternoon. So we have about 3 sessions today, but before that, I think Arzan had a deck he wanted to present, so we'll hand it off to him.
Good morning, everybody. I'm here to introduce the first lecture of the morning, not necessarily the speaker. The first lecture of the morning is the Khorshid Jangalwala Memorial Lecture, and a little bit about who Khorshid Aunty was and what this memorial lecture series is about. Khorshid Jangalwala was born in Surat and grew up in Pune. At university, she studied history, political science, and international law. She worked with the prestigious firm Mullah & Mullah in Bombay and later married Dr. Feroz Jangalwala, a professor of neurochemistry, in 1968. They moved to London and when Feroz was teaching at Cambridge and then later on to the United States. Feroz and Khorshid were founders of the Zoroastrian Association of the Greater Boston area in 1983 and both served as presidents of that association. Khorshid Aunty was actively involved in Zoroastrian community affairs, organizing seminars and conferences, like the Gata Conference in Houston, the Harvard seminars, and the International Avesta Conference in Boston, where she participated as the chair and speaker at several national and international conferences. She was also the member of Fezana's Historic Research and Preservation Committee and the director of the Zoroastrian Education and Research Society and the chair of the Fezana Publication Committee. At Fezana, she worked very hard to modify the World Zoroastrian Organization's charter so that it would truly become a world body for Zoroastrians. After Khorshid Aunty passed away, in honor of her work and dedication to Fezana, along with the family, Fezana set up the Jangalwala Lecture Series, which invites a recognized scholar to present their work at a Fezana Congress or a World Congress. And hence, we have this would be the 9th Khorshid Jangalwala Memorial Lecture Series. It is administered by the Education, Scholarship, and Research Committee of Fezana. Past speakers of the Khorshid Jangalwala Memorial Lecture Series have been Professor Irani, Professor Almud Hinze from London, Professor Octus Caro from Harvard, Professor Jenny Rose from Claremont, Dr. Rustin Mary, Professor Jamshid Choksi from Indiana, Johan Wewena from Oxford, and Dan Sheffield from Princeton. They have been past Jangalwala Memorial Lecture Series speakers, and today we are happy to have Rosheen Kabraji. She will be introduced by Carl.
Thank you, Arzan. So our first session today will be Home and Belonging, Reimaging the Global Zarathusti Youth. And the global Zoroastrian community has been wrestling with the concepts of home and belonging since it was displaced from its homeland, Persia, ancestral Persia. Today we will discuss how young global Zarathustis engage with the idea of home and belonging while reconnecting to their ancestral homeland. The aim of this presentation will shed light on the broader issue of how transnational Zoroastrian youth have negotiated their experience of home and belonging given the community's long history of displacement and migration. So today we'll be introducing Rosheen Kabraji, who is one of the co-founders of the Zoroastrian RTR Return to Roots program. She's currently working on her doctorate from King's College London. Rosheen was formerly Assistant Head of Research Associate at the Asia Program at the Chapman House, a foreign policy think tank in London. She was born and raised in Karachi and has lived in the UK, Thailand, Spain, and she currently resides in Washington, D.C. with her husband and son. So please help me welcome Rosheen Kabraji.
morning, everyone, and thank you for having me here to speak. I would like to thank the Congress Committee for the invitation, and I would also like to express my gratitude to Fazana for being asked to deliver the Khorshid Jangalwala lecture. Oops. The last youth congress I attended was 8 years ago in Vancouver. It was my first youth congress, my first congress ever, and I had mixed feelings about being there. Here's the truth. The first day I arrived, I didn't immediately feel like I belonged. Being surrounded by hundreds of other Zoroastrians didn't instantly give me some kind of warm, fuzzy feeling. And I asked myself why I was surrounded by my people. Well, first, I had come on my own without really knowing anyone, so that was just the usual new place, awkwardness, meeting new people. And that quickly went away once I met my amazing roommates, as well as a host of other people who I'm actually really happy to reconnect with at this Congress. It was another issue that I hadn't actually foreseen. It was my name tag. My name tag. My name tag said I was from London, which I was, but I didn't grow up there. So the other participants from the UK didn't really know who I was. There weren't many others from Pakistan, and I hadn't lived in Pakistan since high school. So I had little idea about the younger generations who might have been there. Here I was, finally not having to explain what a Zoroastrian was, but I still had to explain where I was from and why some things just didn't add up. I found it a little exhausting. For some participants who were born and raised in the US, Canada, the UK, India, Pakistan, Australia, among others, the conversation was a little simpler. But many had similar stories to me, and we found that while we didn't have to explain the Zoroastrian part, we did have a different conversation. Where were we from? Where was home? Where did we belong? Were we more conservative? Were we more liberal? As I left lunch in a pretty bad fog of jet lag on the first day, I passed by a young boy who was perched on one of the steps, speaking in Gujarati to his mother. He was giving her a full breakdown of the lunch menu that day, the entire menu, and was bemoaning the fact that there was no Parsi cutlets, none whatsoever. It's been 8 years and I still remember that cutlet part. So I smiled to myself because I thought, you know what? That's probably what I would be telling my dad too, giving him a breakdown of the food and what was there and what wasn't there. And I quickly came to realize after the Congress, I say quickly, it was gradual, that place was never going to be essential to my sense of belonging. It was important. It was a very important factor that provided explanations for my story, but it would not be definitive to my experience of belonging. So what was? I didn't know it then, but I would soon be a part of an incredible community of young men and women from across the Zoroastrian diaspora who would help provide invaluable insights to this question. That group came to be the alumni of the Zoroastrian Return to Roots program. So, I want to share with you the stories of your fellow Zarathustis who decided to participate on Zoroastrian Return to Roots. It's a trip which takes Zoroastrian youth from across the diaspora to India for around 10 days to explore their religious, cultural, and community heritage. And the interesting part for me, as full disclosure, I'm one of the co-founders, I was really interested in how they feel they have juggled their local and global identities as they go through their individual life journeys. By sharing their experiences and some of my own, I hope that over the next few days it triggers conversations around questions you may be grappling with. Many of you may not be dealing with these particular questions that come up in what follows. But you may be facing other challenges which I would ask you to share in the Q&A session if you like, so that we can expand our understanding collectively. Either way, please use this unique opportunity here at the Congress over the next few days to open up and have these conversations with friends, both old and new. Agree, disagree, agree to disagree, but listen to each other, and most of all, respect each other. But first, why am I here talking to you about issues of home and belonging? My first real introspection into recognizing the more fluid nature of my identity probably began when I moved from Karachi to London when I was 18 to go to university. And so much so that my undergraduate dissertation focused on the ideas of home and belonging in the Parsi diaspora. Thus began my ongoing personal research interest in the concepts of home, homeland, and belonging, and how they related to the Zoroastrian community more broadly. And I actually looked at this issue through reading novels, particularly those of Bapsi Sidhwa and Rowington Mystery. And while their works provide invaluable and vivid insights into the dilemmas of the Parsi community in India and across the diaspora, and are relevant to the community today, particularly our parents' generation, there is a disconnect with our generation. That primary disconnect is of birthplace and migration patterns. So what do I mean by that? Well, we're not talking about our parents' generation who were largely born in the traditional ancestral homelands of India, Pakistan, Iran, but our generation who are born outside of these countries or now live out of the ancestral homelands. Additionally, our migration patterns are no longer unidirectional, but more circular or multidirectional. So for example, you may have been born in India and you now live in Australia, or you may have been born in the US and now live in the UK and plan on moving to Thailand. The possibilities for us are now endless, and the possible combinations of identities we hold at any given time, which are also constantly changing, have also multiplied. I'm going to focus on the concept of belonging because it is the more complex issue in some ways, and hence intriguing for an academic to tackle. But first of all, what do I actually mean by belonging? In a paper written by Neera Yuval Davis called Belonging and the Politics of Belonging, this definition is provided. Belonging is about emotional attachment, feeling at home, feeling safe. To me, what's really interesting here is this emotional attachment element. And that's probably what I found for myself personally, and subsequently through the Zoroastrian Return to Roots program and their participants, was the concept that was potentially most intriguing. Identity is another word which is notoriously difficult to define, so I'm not really going to get into that. But again, I'm going to refer to Yuval Davis, who sees identities as narratives, essentially as stories that we tell people about ourselves, who we are and who we are not. And in particular, there's a statement made that, and I quote, "Constructions of belonging cannot and should not be seen as merely cognitive stories. They reflect emotional investments and a desire for attachments," end quote. What I've come to realize since the last Congress is that I had not actually made an emotional investment in the global Zoroastrian community. I felt I had invested in my family and my community in Karachi, and that was where my attachment lay. But the longer I spend away from Karachi, and as the community there continues to shrink, I recognized that I needed and I wanted to make the emotional and intellectual investment in the global Zoroastrian diaspora. And this seems to align with Yuval Davis's conclusion that as a rule, the emotional components, and I quote from As a rule, the emotional components of people's constructions of themselves and their identities become more central the more threatened and less secure they feel. And that's probably what I was feeling as a 20-something making my adult life in London. But first up, to get you thinking about your own story, I would like you to indulge me and fill in the blanks for yourself. However you choose to, in your head, to your neighbor. And in the meantime, here's mine. I grew up in Karachi, Bangkok, and London, which meant I enjoyed negotiating and playing with many identities. I am Pakistani, I am British, I am a woman, and a Zoroastrian. I live in the United States with my husband James and my son Darius. I'm working on my PhD long distance from London, and my fieldwork is in Karachi and Mumbai. So between my personal and work life, I am spread out across 3 continents. And I'm thinking more and more about what grounds me and how differently I feel in each place. I would say I feel at home in all these places. I have deep roots in all these places. I don't necessarily feel like I belong in all these places. So over here, I'd just like to get you thinking a little bit about your own story, how you feel about it, and if you've ever wondered about what makes you feel like you belong somewhere. And this brings me to the stories, insights, and perceptions from our Return to Roots participants, which I will continue to refer to as RTR. RTR was established in 2012 and is a 2-week trip that takes youth back to, at the moment, just to India. And we hope to go to Iran someday, but nevertheless, we have really tried to make sure that there are Irani Zarathustis on every trip. And it has provided really interesting insights to the question of belonging, because, of course, their ancestral homeland would be considered to be Iran, not India. There have been 5 trips so far. Approximately 80 men and women from across the globe have participated, many of whom are here today. And the average age of the participants was around 28 years old. That little fill in the blanks was actually inspired by an RTR fellow. And this is her quote in full. And what I found intriguing about her quote was this concept of finding a sensitive balance between all her different identities residing in North America. And the choices, sometimes the tough choices, that she had to make in her everyday life. So this brings me to the survey that I conducted. And the data and quotes you will see are drawn from 3 sources. A survey that was sent to participants in 2016 and 2019, RTR post-trip surveys, and articles that fellows wrote for community journals like Fazana, and presentations given to Zoroastrian associations across the globe. These were the 2 questions that I was interested in and this talk will focus on. Particularly, what can we learn about how our generation relates to ideas of home and belonging? A quick caveat, this survey is by no means an academically rigorous survey. It's just meant to give us a quick snapshot of some of the key issues that are emerging from participants in the program. But if there are any budding social science researchers there who would like to engage with this research question, please feel free to come talk to me later. So you had around 56 participants who took the survey. Roughly half of them were male and half female. And you can see that the breakdown in terms of country of birth, there's a significant portion from Pakistan, and then followed by India and the US, and you can see as follows. But really it's to my earlier point of circular and unidirectional migration. Because as you can see, while many of them were born in Pakistan or India, the majority now reside in the US and Canada. Applications for the first trip were purposely targeted to youth outside of India, but on the next few trips, youth from India were also invited to apply, and they joined. And part of that meant that, again, you were talking about people who were not living outside of India and having an experience outside of India, but were from Mumbai or places in Gujarat. And their experiences and their connections on this tour are very telling. Here's a breakdown of the majority of participants define themselves as Parsi, followed by Irani Zarathusti. And this basically wraps up to give you an idea of who the participants are and where they came from. So now let's get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty. In a paper on the changing dynamics of family life in America, Gillis argues, and I quote, "Because family can now be anywhere, it has become incumbent on families to make their own sense of place another one of the peculiar features of our modern age," end quote. The responses that I received in the survey basically support the contention that home is something that everyone must construct for him or herself. But I wanted to figure out, what did the participants think? Is there a difference between home and belonging? Most of them said yes, but you can see that there's a significant portion who weren't sure. This is how some of them defined home and belonging and the difference between them. The idea that maybe they weren't mutually exclusive and they really did overlap. And some others defined it as a place where an individual physically resides. And this was prompted by the survey question, where participants were asked to define what home meant to them. The most frequently selected definition was, home is the place, and I quote, "the place where one lives permanently, especially as a member of a family or household." And the second most popular definition was, and I quote, "home is not necessarily where one belongs, but the place where one starts from." And this reinforces many of the distinctions that participants did make in defining the difference between home and belonging by focusing on the centrality of place. But there were others who said, you know what, home is really where you were born and raised, and it's not a place. It's a feeling, and it can be anywhere. If you have your family and your loved ones around you, home can be anywhere. When participants were asked to select where home geographically was, most of them said the house, the home, the apartment that you currently live in, followed by the country, and some even referred to the country their parents migrated from. So a particularly intriguing aspect of the Zoroastrian concept of homeland is that, unlike other ethno-religious communities that continue to either fight for territory, they no longer seek a country of their own. And instead, the community has mostly come to pride itself on its ability to adapt in their host country. Historically, it is the Parsis who have petitioned for a homeland for their own, both within the Indian subcontinent and in the West. Prior to the partition of the Indian subcontinent in 1947, John Hinnell's, a renowned scholar of Zoroastrianism, traces a call for Parsistan, with its own army, to a Parsi from Pakistan. Khan Bahadur Patel declared in 1905 that the Parsis would never be natives of India and therefore had to look for a safe haven of their own. There's another reference, which is actually traced back by Sripati Chandrasekhar, who describes how a group of Parsi businessmen from Baroda in India wrote to the US consul in Bombay in 1875, inquiring on the situation in America, as many from their community were considering migrating there. Here's one of the more thought-provoking results, at least for me, is how the participants viewed their ancestral homeland. The majority selected, they were allowed to pick multiple, not just one, multiple choices, and the majority picked Iran, closely followed by India, and then ancient Persia. As ancient Persia is a place that only exists in history and in the imagination, it is somehow still seen as an ancestral homeland for a significant number of participants. And it is indicative of how the connection to an ancestral homeland is not necessarily tied to state-defined territory. It also adds an extra layer of complexity because this seems to translate not only to an imagined community, but also to an imagined place for this transnational diaspora community. And I haven't been really able to get into assess how the participants define ancient Persia and why it still holds such a strong grip on the idea of where your ancestral homeland is. But what the responses do suggest is the ability of this generation of Zoroastrians to adeptly hold multiple ideas of where their ancestral homeland is at the same time, not necessarily having to identify with or show loyalty to only one. For some Parsis, the sovereign territory of India or Pakistan may be their home, their nation, and they still look west to Iran or ancient Persia. For Irani Zarathustis, while the sovereign territory of Iran may be their home, their nation, they sometimes look east to India, where their ancestral rituals and traditions are being kept alive, albeit in a distinctly different way. So now let's pull together some of these concepts of home belonging in the ancestral homelands. So as you can see, there are around 69% who agree or strongly agree that there is a connection between ancestral homeland and belonging. The connection to home is less decisive. People were a little bit, in some ways, there's more of a split there. So the results showed a stronger correlation between belonging and physically returning to ancestral homelands than home and physically returning to ancestral homelands. And my deliberate use of place opposed to land is precisely because that place could exist only in an individual's imagination, fused by nostalgic memory and historical definitions, such as ancient Persia. Okay, so quick poll time. How many of you have been asked this question? Just raise your hand. All right. I admit this question was really driven out of curiosity because I'm asked this question so often. And sometimes I just make up the answer because I'm an anthropologist and I find it fascinating how humans choose to categorize you in split seconds. So from taxi drivers to immigration officers who have my passport but still seem to want to ask where I'm from, to professional situations where someone once stopped me mid-conversation to ask where I got my transatlantic accent from. I have my 10-second answers for strangers I don't plan on seeing again, my elevator spiel for new acquaintances, and then the deep dive for people I actually want to get to know. And it is one of the most commonly asked questions of children who are children of immigrants, especially in North America and Europe. And I wanted to gauge how frequently this occurred with participants and how they felt about it. And these were some of their answers, and they range from, there's a sense of isolation, there are issues of feeling that there's an identity crisis, there's also a feeling of some participants thinking they're being criticized when they do affiliate with one group or with another. And the feeling of being an other does come through. I kind of really like the knowledge bombs. This is another one, the tone there were a number of participants who referred to the tone in which somebody asked the question, either made them more open or put them a little bit on edge. And then some were just generally frustrated, thinking it was a silly question. Annoyed, but they understood. Some felt proud to describe where they were from. Some were generally neutral about it. Others were indifferent. Others felt othered. And others just liked the question. So, as each of you are individuals, each of you have your own experiences. Some are shared, some are not. And there's a whole range of answers here for you all to unpick in social time. So, the participants, however, who did voice a deeper sense of alienation had either grown up or still live in Pakistan. I haven't actually, been able to analyze that any further, but that's just something that I leave you with for some of the participants from Pakistan to think about. This brings me to the point of, so are there new forms of belonging that are emerging for our community? And I would suggest that the combination of gaining knowledge and communicating with people who are facing similar dilemmas in the places they were learning about, i.e. in India, was one of the most powerful mixtures that affected the participants' sense of belonging, because it was placed in the context of community. And again, over here, I just want to pull out the idea of knowledge and networks together, because I'll refer to John Hinnells again, who surveyed over 1,800 Zoroastrians across the diaspora. And he too found a clear link between engagement with networks and the, quote, preservation and, quote, assertion of Zoroastrian identity. And that's basically the core elements of a congress: knowledge and networking. So you're already doing that, and that's great. But I would like to expand this a little bit further to argue that for the youth, the environment in which this knowledge is gained and the networks that are built are vital, as many RTR participants did not have memories or links to the ancestral homelands to necessarily sustain their Zoroastrian identity. And that just, again, applies to some of them, not all, but it is a factor. So, to begin wrapping up, my original contention was that even for one of the world's most self-proclaimed, well-adapted diaspora communities, place, not necessarily state-defined territory, is central to the idea of homeland, but is distinct from the idea of home. And while the participants' responses support this, what I had not anticipated was how the convergence of specific factors in that place would affect their sense of belonging. And to belong, an individual must not only feel visible, but also recognized and embraced by the entity, sometimes, that he or she seeks to belong to. In this case, it is not just individual recognition, but greater visibility of a community on a citywide scale or a countrywide scale that plays heavily into creating a sense of belonging by feeling a part of something bigger. Community came up time and time again as a core element of feeling like you belong to something bigger. What I uncovered was that learning about community history was not necessarily connected to the idea of home, but it was tied to a sense of belonging to a community that transcends borders. From their experience in Mumbai especially, participants clearly felt that this was a place where Parsi identity could be seen in visible and tangible ways, from Irani cafes to their places of worship, residential colonies, as well as the presence of global Parsi business houses. For Iranian Zarathustis, as well as those Parsis who are not from India, it is the prevalence of Zoroastrian heritage and the living community in India that gives one a sense of being a part of a large, vibrant community that is still visible today in a global megacity, not just in memories or in the past or in academic textbooks. Most of the youth who participated in the trip felt that what they were often lacking in most was religious knowledge and the meanings behind specific rituals and customs. I touch upon this point briefly for those of us who are putting roots down in countries far away from our parents and families and have come to the realization, perhaps, that we often rely heavily on their interpretation and knowledge of our rituals and customs. One of the fellows talked about her relationship with wearing her sadra and kasti. For her, how her parents set an example was crucial. She says, and I quote, "As a child growing up, it's helpful to see parents practice religious rituals along with you. My parents don't follow the daily religious customs, so I didn't understand why I was being told to commit to something religiously that they weren't." The element of recognition and visibility feeds into a sense of community pride, which many participants spoke of. However, with realistic views that much of this pride comes from the past. For others, the opportunity to witness exhibitions in India, such as the Threads of Continuity and the Everlasting Flame exhibition, provided that same sense of belonging because the individual was able to walk amongst and tangibly see, hear, and communicate with a culture, religion, and tradition that was alive beyond her family and home. She says, and I quote, "I had never been in such a huge gathering with so many Zoroastrians under one roof exploring our history and culture together. My identity crisis vanished. A sense of belonging and self-identity emerged as I wandered deeper through the exhibition. I walked away with a sense of pride in what I am," end quote. I can relate to what this participant was talking about because when the Everlasting Flame exhibition was held at SOAS University in London, I went to the exhibition numerous times with my friends, mostly my English friends, who I had known for over a decade, but had never really been able to share this part of myself. And it was fun to talk about it, and then go eat some tandar after. So it was great. So to conclude, what you're doing now is building networks across the Zoroastrian community. But you're also not unlike diaspora youth all over the world whose experiences and aspirations do not necessarily reflect their parents' views and beliefs. And the youth on this trip faced the same dilemmas and frustrations and appreciated being able to have in-depth conversations with their fellow participants. Some talked about this unbreakable bond between us, lifelong friends, my Zoroastrian buddies to the very end. But let's be real. It's really not uncommon when you're in an intense environment where you're with the same group of people, nonstop, facing various dilemmas along the trip, particularly having issues with your stomachs and staying up too late and dragging yourself up onto a hot, dusty bus in the morning. It bonds you, but it's like many friendships we've had at university and school, and some of them, a lot of them, fizzle out as life goes on and you all go back to your respective homes. So while I view the passion with which many talk about the connections they've made with some caution, they are bound by an experience that is also reinforced through technology and mobility. So whether we're talking about Facebook or WhatsApp, as well as the ability for all of you to fly here or fly to different places and see each other. So what I take away from some of these declarations has more to do with the importance of relating to people who face similar challenges and opportunities, which returns to this feeling of being a part of something bigger. And that's possibly one of the core takeaways, was just being able to bond on a smaller scale. And while physically returning to India or other ancestral homelands is not necessarily connected to this idea of home, it is increasingly, at least from this group, tied to a sense of belonging, which in turn is connected to being a part of a larger culturally familiar entity. And I would argue here that that entity is this amorphous, globally interconnected community of individuals who share similar complex identities in their homes across the diaspora. In summary, you guys. Again, just the emphasis on knowledge and friendship coming together, and that seemed to be, two of the key aspects of being a part of something beyond yourself. I'd like to end with this quote from one of our RTR participants, who is Irani Zarathusti, because she talks about the divide between the Parsi community and the Irani community, Irani Zarathusti community. And her final sentence of, that's where we should focus our energy, on learning and growing from one another, on being able to start a conversation because we know the same prayer, but not letting that be the only thing that connects us. And I think that that's really one of the most powerful takeaways from any Congress, is your ability to talk outside of your particular niche communities, whether that be geographical or ethnic. So, to wrap up, I've emphasized it, but knowledge and networks, our parents have been doing that. Our parents are great at it, knowledge and networks. What we need to focus on are the tools of technology and mobility. There's a lot of brain power in this room. I'm not sure it's running at 100% right now, but I know it's there. I know it's there. Because there needs to be collective and individual willpower to use these tools for our generation. Because it's our story now. It's our show. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise. So what you do over the next few days, the conversations you have, think about these things. Open yourself up and figure out ways of how we can use technology and our ability to be so mobile to foster our sense of belonging across the global diaspora for the next generations. Thank you for listening, and thank you most of all to the incredible young men and women who have shared their stories with me so that I was able to share this with all of you. Thank you. Sorry, just sidebar. I've been told that there is a little bit of time for Q&A and comments. I would just like to point out that if there are any specific questions to the RTR program, there is a session coming up next, so I would ask you to save those questions for the next session, but otherwise I'm happy to take questions and hear comments.
So my question is around the, first of all, thank you for organizing RTR and all that stuff. Great work. But it's along the sense of belonging and how kind of a lot of the research seems to take it from like a late antiquity Western lens. So from, like, for example, Xenophon wrote in like the Annals of Xerxes, and how a lot of the Persians seem to move the capital from Susa to Persepolis. Right?
Yeah.
And that was weird, right? Like, why are these guys moving around all over the place? But my view on that was that a lot of us were doing that for opportunity, and that was a strength of ours. But if we look at it as a weakness, how some of my perception of the research is, and could you address that maybe? Like, couldn't it also be a strength that we would just move around to wherever the best place was at any given time, and that's why we thrive as a community?
Oh, absolutely. And that was to my point of we have become very good at adapting. And it is a huge strength, which a lot of other communities grapple with, in my personal opinion, a little bit more than we do. We have our challenges, but I think that's an excellent question. And you're right, that this is a strength. And in my conclusion, what I was prompting you all to think about a little bit more is, how do we make that even stronger? You know, how do we use the tools that we have at our disposal in our generation to make that ability of moving around, shifting to different places, being where we're going to thrive, and using whatever opportunities we have to ensure that happens, and not just thinking about our generation, but respecting the generations that have come before us and learning from them, and then thinking about the next generation as well, and to make sure that we're not myopic in our views and what we do here. Anybody else?
There's a question. I was just wondering if you would be able to comment on how our experiences with the sense of belonging across generations would compare with other stateless diasporas, or, for example, the Jews before 1948?
So there are a lot of parallels between the Zoroastrian community and the Jewish community, even the Armenian diaspora as well. And I think one of the primary differences, of course, is the fact that the Jewish community does have a homeland, a country, a nation. And I think that that does affect your sense of belonging. And I would see that as one of the key differences. Not the only differences, but definitely the fact that you can fly to a country where you would be in the majority is one of the experiences which Zoroastrians would never feel going to a particular country. The closest, as I mentioned, you get to that is being in India at big community events, and right here. So, you know, that's where you can get that sense of belonging. But as I started out with, just attending a congress doesn't give you automatically some sense of belonging. It also requires a certain amount of emotional investment in the global diaspora community, or intellectual. Choose whatever avenue you find best for yourself. And I think that will help facilitate it. There's no guarantees here, because I'm just figuring all this out for myself as well.
I'm going to get
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much for co-founding this R2R and exposing the youth for a chance of defining their identifications and belongings. So what you analyzed, it was amazing of how this R2R affects the definitions of the identity for the people here. I wonder if you analyze also how does it affect the view of society towards their future. So this movement is return to roots. But for the peoples, the societies, which still they are isolated, I'm not very familiar with the society of India, but let's say the society of the Irans might be more isolated and they might not have complete understanding of how does the youth in other places in the world are doing and what is their plan. So the other way, have you studied and analyzed the effect of this R2R on the societies who get exposed to their youth and the futures in different sides of the world?
That's a really fantastic question because, in summary, I have not. There is a wealth of information, and the main takeaway from this is that there are only more questions. There are only more groups to speak to. And this is a tiny sample, tiny, 50-odd people. But there are, hopefully, as you can see, interesting elements that emerge from it. As you mentioned, have we thought about how this relates to society in a wider way, in different contexts for the youth in Iran? So, in short, I haven't been able to look at it, but it's a great question and definitely one that I think should be a part of this ongoing research. So thank you for that.
Thank you for a brilliant analysis for this. And I appreciate it very much because I belong to a generation before. My suggestion is, or question is, that since you carried out this survey of 80 or less than 80 people, and some of them are here, would you like to carry out similar example or survey for this group, the 400 people who are here, or even a larger group of 50,000 youth around the world, and do on a statistical sampling basis? That would be great. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
I just data protection, I just need your email addresses, and I'm happy to send it out to whoever would like, because this really was a presentation for you all to decide whether there's any potential here. Should we keep exploring this issue? Are there further questions that we need to explore here? And obviously I think there are, but this really is about all of you, and I'm going to include myself in that as well as being a part of this generation. It's for us. So yes, I would love to be able to send this survey out to the wider Zoroastrian community, because I think there is a wealth of information, and each of you have a completely different story and completely different feelings about all of this. So we can give you, this is what the majority think, but I think it's helpful to at least know that, so that when I'm saying, oh, use these tools to go do something, you can actually see where to put that energy and time and resources into, which are finite.
Okay, last question back here.
I was wondering what role you think the politics of Iran plays in Zoroastrians' identity of home and belonging. So, for example, instead of, say, the current Islamist regime in Iran, if there were a government that was more secular and that honored the pre-Islamic Zoroastrian history of Iran, like the Shah's regime before the revolution, do you think that that would perhaps lead to a greater sense of identity of Iran as the home and place of belonging of Zoroastrians?
Again, a question I would love to have been able to answer, but my research unfortunately didn't get into that. However, your point is relevant in that how different countries engage with us Zoroastrians being there is crucial to how we feel we belong or we don't belong. There's no surprise, as you saw in that slide there, that the majority of people who were born in Iran, India, and Pakistan were now living in the United States or Canada. That in and of itself tells you something about the countries, the host countries and places where our generation feels like we can put our roots down here and this actually feels like home and we have a sense of belonging. Okay. All right, that wraps up the Q&A, and thank you all very much for listening.
All right, thank you, Rosheen. That was great. Please accept this small token of our appreciation.
Oh, I thank you. Thank you very much.